like the video, subscribe, and comment your country below so I know who's listening tonight. Turn off the lights and put on headphones for the full horror experience. Let's begin the nightmare. If you're brave enough. At Blackwater High, the school everyone pretended was normal. There were stories older than any of the surviving faculty, stories so violent and so deeply embedded into the cracked tiles and rotting hallways that even students who didn't believe in ghosts learned to walk faster when the lights flickered, because the massacre that happened here wasn't just a tragedy, it was a ritual, an event so soaked in blood that it never truly ended. It just paused, waiting for new faces, new bodies, new voices to scream. And the administrators who rebuilt the campus never worried about safety, they worried about containment. Because the issue wasn't stopping violence, it was stopping the violence from spreading. And when I first arrived, completely unaware of how cursed this place really was, I thought the rumors were jokes or exaggerations, kids trying to freak each other out. But the first night in the dorm I heard a voice whisper through the bathroom vents, a soft, dragging voice, like someone choked halfway through a sentence, muttering words I couldn't translate but somehow felt in my bones. And that night, I noticed all the mirrors in the bathroom had a faint film over them. Not dust, not steam, but something oily, something that reflected light wrong. Like the surface wasn't glass but a thin layer of skin stretched too tightly. And the longer I stared, the more I realized the reflection didn't match my movements perfectly. There was a half-second delay, a hesitation, like someone behind the mirror was trying to follow but didn't know how to move like a human anymore. And before I could turn away, I saw a face form behind me, pale, blurred, with a mouth too wide and eyes missing entirely. Just dark wet hollows staring over my shoulder, and I froze, unable to breathe. Because I didn't understand if I was hallucinating or if the mirror was showing me something that existed behind me but couldn't be seen with naked eyes. But when the lights flickered and the reflection vanished, I heard a soft tapping from inside the wall. 1, 2, 3. Polite, rhythmic, like someone trapped behind it was knocking to be let out. And later I learned that every year, students disappeared in the bathrooms, always at night, always silently, leaving towels, toothbrushes, possessions behind, like they were mid-routine when something took them, and every time a student vanished. The school issued a statement blaming runaways, even though dozens of parents insisted their children would never flee, and classmates swore they heard muffled screaming from behind the walls, and one boy claimed he saw a hand press against the mirror, stretched and deformed, fingers too long, nails cracked and black, before sinking back into the glass like the surface was liquid. And when the faculty found him shaking in the hallway, they sedated him and transferred him to another institution the next morning, without letting him pack, without letting him speak to anyone, which made everyone realize something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. But students stopped asking questions, because every person who investigated disappeared or went insane, and teachers walked the hallways at night with flashlights and rosaries, whispering prayers under their breath, acting like they were wardens in a prison, not educators, because no one talked about the massacre that happened here. The one where a student killed 37 people with a broken mirror shard, carving their faces into ribbons before slicing his own throat wide open. But every witness described the same thing. His reflection moved before he did, smiling even when his real face didn't, like something else was orchestrating the violence from behind the glass. And when they found his body, his face was missing, peeled clean, nowhere to be found, but his reflection still had one, staring back at investigators from the mirror with a grin so stretched that it looked like it would tear. And the mirror fragments from that night were never recovered, because every single piece went missing from the crime lab, and one officer who tried to investigate reported hearing whispering coming from the shards before disappearing himself. And now, decades later, everyone tries to pretend this place is normal. But the walls remember, the mirrors remember, the blood remembers. And each new student is just fresh oxygen for an ancient fire that never really burned out. And I didn't understand any of this until the night I heard my name whispered from the bathroom mirror in a voice that sounded almost like mine, but broken, as if someone had reconstructed my voice from memory. And when I leaned closer, heart pounding, I saw not my face, but something wearing my face, smiling wider than I ever could, raising a hand to the glass like it was politely asking permission to cross over into my world. And I should have walked away right then, should have run down the hallway and pretended none of it happened. But curiosity is a predator, and fear doesn't always paralyze you. Sometimes it lures you closer, tricks you into thinking you have control. So I reached out and touched the glass, fingertips trembling, and instantly the mirror went ice cold, so cold it burned, and I yanked my hand back, skin red and numb. And as I stared at my reflection, I realized something was wrong with the bathroom itself, because the room behind me wasn't reflecting correctly. It looked longer, darker, the stalls stretched, warped, slanted, as if the space behind me was bending inward, collapsing, expanding, doing things geometry wasn't meant to do, and there were shadows where nothing should cast shadows, long, thin, wrong shadows, shapes of people who weren't there, heads tilted sideways, limbs contorted, and the smell hit me then, a putrid, rotten stench, like the inside of a wet grave, and underneath it, something metallic, sharp, unmistakable, dried blood, and I backed up slowly as the lights flickered violently, buzzing, shorting, and every time the light blinked off, I saw those shapes get closer, not walking, not crawling, but sliding forward, like reality couldn't decide how to animate them. And when the lights stabilized, I found myself alone again, which should have comforted me, but instead made my stomach twist, because I realized this place didn't want to scare me. It wanted to assess me, measure me, figure out whether I was suitable, and the next morning, whole sections of the school were sealed off with caution tape. Security guards stood outside the bathrooms, and no one explained anything. But we all noticed that 2 students from the freshman dorm were missing, their beds stripped, their names erased from attendance sheets, their parents called in the middle of the night, escorted off campus by administration before any of us woke up, and I overheard one teacher whisper that the school couldn't keep covering this up forever, that they needed another containment attempt before more bodies were lost, and that phrase stuck with me. Containment attempt, because schools don't use language like that, laboratories do, but Blackwater High never felt like an institution built to educate, it felt like a facility built around a threat, and every hallway, every locked door, every reinforced wall screamed the same truth. They weren't keeping outsiders out, they were keeping something in, something ancient and hostile that wasn't finished eating, and every student here was a ration, measured and portioned, fed into the dark in manageable doses so it wouldn't starve and devour everything at once, and the older students knew this. You could see it in the way they walked, always avoiding reflections, avoiding windows at night, keeping their eyes down when they brushed their teeth, because they didn't want to see anything staring back. And during assemblies, administrators gave speeches about mental health awareness, urging us to report any signs of hallucinations, paranoia, dissociation, not because they cared about our well-being, but because those symptoms were early indicators of contamination, symptoms of someone being watched, chosen, marked, and if a student reached a certain threshold of mental deterioration, the school intervened, quietly, with security teams and medical vans, and you never saw that student again. Except sometimes you heard them, muffled in the pipes, in the vents, crying, begging, or snarling like an animal, and everyone pretended not to hear, because listening was dangerous. Acknowledging the voices made them stronger, and I didn't understand any of this until I started dreaming about the mirror, dreams where I stood naked in front of it, staring into an abyss that wasn't glass but a hole, a gate, a mouth, and something inside whispered that I didn't belong to myself anymore, that I was being rewritten, that the person I thought I was would be peeled away like a layer of wallpaper, leaving something older underneath, a shape that wasn't mine but always hidden beneath, waiting, and those dreams left me waking up with a metallic taste in my mouth, like I had bitten through my own tongue, and sometimes I did, because there were drops of blood on my pillow, but I didn't tell anyone, because by now I knew the rules. Report symptoms, disappear. And one night I caught a janitor staring into a hallway mirror after hours, whispering to it, holding a mop handle like a spear, trembling, saying words that sounded like prayers mixed with warnings, and I watched as his reflection didn't mimic him, didn't speak when he spoke, didn't blink when he blinked, and when he noticed me, he grabbed me by the shirt and hissed, "Don't ever let it see you scared, it copies fear first." And before I could ask what that meant, The floor beneath us resounded with a heavy, dragging thud, like something huge and wet was crawling through the walls, and the janitor dropped me, backed away slowly, eyes locked on the mirror, and whispered, "It's loose tonight," before shoving a wedge under the bathroom door, sealing it, and sprinting away without another word, leaving me alone in the flickering hallway, listening to something enormous and hungry move beneath my feet, scraping the tiles like nails across bone, and I stood there, frozen, realizing that what haunted this school wasn't a ghost looking for vengeance, it was a predator looking for a replacement. The first week passed and nothing calmed down. In fact, the school felt stranger every day. Students complained of cold chills in the hallway near the old bathrooms. Some said they heard faint whistling coming from behind the mirror like someone mocking them, and the teachers brushed it off as stress, but even they looked over their shoulders when they passed that corridor, because the maintenance lights flickered constantly and sometimes went out entirely for hours, leaving the entire stretch in pitch darkness, and every time the lights finally returned, there were deep scratch marks on the walls, floor, and even on the locked bathroom doors, as if someone or something was trapped inside and desperately trying to claw its way out. One morning before class assembly, a junior student named Samir, known for being a prankster, dared a group of friends to go inside the abandoned bathroom at night, claiming that he had heard the sound of a man humming a lullaby behind the mirror, and he thought it would be cool footage for TikTok, because if the hallway was scary, the bathroom itself was on another level. Wet tiles that smelled of rust and rot, flickering blue fluorescent lights, broken stalls stained with dark dried residue that everyone pretended was just paint, and a huge shattered mirror above the sinks covered in black mold streaks and spiderweb cracks forming a distorted reflection of anyone who stood in front of it. But behind all the structural decay, there was something else, an unsettling pressure, like the space wasn't empty, like someone was standing too close to you, breathing shallowly behind your neck, even though there was nothing but stale air and dripping water. The bathroom had a legend that everyone whispered but no one admitted believing, that a man once lived inside the walls, a janitor who was fired decades ago after being caught watching students from hidden vents, and when they tried to remove him, he snapped and slaughtered 6 people with a sharpened tool before disappearing, leaving only a trail of blood leading into the bathroom, and when police forced the mirror off the wall, they found a dark cavity behind it filled with rotten clothes, tools, scraps of hair, and bite marks on the wood, as if someone had been eating raw materials to survive. They searched but never found the man, and ever since then, students claimed the mirror sometimes showed his reflection instead of theirs. When Samir and his friends arrived at school early Sunday night with their phones and flashlights, the gates were locked, but they had found a spot where the fence was broken, likely from kids sneaking in years ago, and they slipped through laughing and joking, unaware of how quiet and empty the school sounded without the usual chaos of students, because the silence turned the familiar building into a mausoleum, where every noise echoed too loudly, and even the wind felt wrong, moving through the corridors with a low moaning sound like a dying breath. They reached the bathroom, and the moment the door creaked open, the smell punched them in the face, a mix of sewage, rot, and something bitter, almost metallic, and the tiles were wet even though it hadn't rained for weeks, and the lights didn't flicker. They were off entirely, extinguished into total blackness, so they turned on their phone flashlights, beams bouncing against the mirror and reflecting a kaleidoscope of fractured angles that made the room look like endless copies of itself, stretching into darkness. When they stepped further in, their footsteps echoed strangely delayed, like the floor itself was absorbing sound then releasing it seconds later, and Samir, pretending to be fearless, walked up to the mirror, raised his phone, and said, "If anyone's in there, come out," and the moment his words faded, the dripping stopped, the echoes stopped, the entire bathroom went into an unnatural silence, and his breath fogged the mirror even though the air was warm. One of the others nervously whispered his name, telling him to stop messing around, but before Samir could say anything back, something dragged itself loudly behind the wall, a rough scrape like fingernails or bone-scraping brick, and every student froze as the sound moved slowly toward them, stretching from one end of the wall to the mirror, stopping exactly behind where Samir stood. The lights flickered once, then came back in a dull bluish haze, and in the reflection the students saw something horrifying. A tall shadow behind Samir, too large to be human, crouched awkwardly like bones had healed wrong, a head with no eyes, just a stretched mouth filled with jagged uneven teeth, open wide like it was smiling directly into the camera. They all screamed and ran, except Samir, who didn't move because his feet were rooted to the ground like he was hypnotized, eyes wide, shaking but unable to scream, and the creature leaned down behind him in the reflection, its mouth opening wider, wider, impossibly wide, and slowly reaching around his head like a snake unhinging its jaw. The lights went out, there was a wet snapping sound, and the group stumbled down the hallway, falling over themselves in panic, but when they finally turned back, Samir wasn't there, and neither was the creature, just a trail of slick blood leading under the bathroom door, which shut violently on its own with a deafening slam that echoed like a gunshot. They called his name, but something whispered back from behind the wood, mimicking his voice perfectly. "Come back, please. I'm okay." And that was the moment they ran full speed out of the school, swearing never to speak of it again, because they knew deep inside it wasn't Samir calling them. It was the man behind the mirror, using his voice like a hook to bring more victims inside the walls. And the worst part was that when they looked back through the fence, the bathroom light flickered once, and in the shattered mirror, 4 dark shadows were standing there, silently watching them leave, smiling. The next morning the school was buzzing with chaos because Samir never came home. His parents filed a missing report and police arrived on campus asking students questions, but none of the kids who snuck into the bathroom said a word, terrified that they would be blamed or worse, forced to return to that hallway with adults who didn't believe in monsters. And as the day dragged on, the school atmosphere changed from frantic to suffocating. The air thick with dread, teachers whispering, students crying, and everyone feeling like something unseen was stalking them between periods, watching from vents, cracks, mirrors, and ceiling tiles, waiting to be acknowledged. And the strange part was that a maintenance crew had already been scheduled to inspect the old bathroom that same day, as if the building itself knew something was coming. And around noon a janitor named Malik went alone to check for electrical faults, pushing a heavy tool cart toward the dark hallway, humming nervously to himself until his voice cracked because he could hear faint clicking sounds from behind the walls, rhythmic, purposeful, like someone tapping a metal tool against tile. And as he approached the door, the lights flickered on and off rapidly, almost strobing, throwing shadows across the hallway in violent, jagged bursts, making him feel dizzy and disoriented. But he forced himself to unlock the bathroom, telling himself it was just bad wiring. And the moment the door swung open, a wave of humidity and rot hit him, strong enough to make him gag, but he held his breath and dragged the cart inside, unaware that as soon as he crossed the threshold, the door slowly began closing behind him, silently, like something was pushing it shut with deliberate, careful strength. Inside, Malik inspected the lights, trying not to look directly at the shattered mirror because reflection after reflection of his body made him feel like there were dozens of versions of himself surrounding him, and he kept swearing he saw movement in the cracks, as if someone, was standing behind him in the fragments where he should have been alone. And when he leaned in closer, bracing his hands against the filthy sink, the lights snapped off completely, plunging the room into darkness, followed by a slow, heavy breathing from behind him. Too close, too human, too hungry, and Malik froze in place, unable to reach his flashlight because something touched the back of his neck with long, wet fingers that dragged slowly up his skin, leaving cold slime behind. And when the lights flickered back on, Malik saw his own reflection, except his face in the mirror had its mouth split open ear to ear, eyes rolled back, and hands pressed against the glass like it was trying to break out. And before he could scream, something erupted from the mirror with a shriek of cracking glass, a pale, mutilated arm stabbing outward and wrapping around Malik's throat with impossible strength, dragging him toward the mirror, and he clawed at the edges, boots scraping the floor, metal tools clanging. But the creature yanked him halfway inside the frame, bones snapping in a disgusting crunch as Malik's body folded unnaturally, twisting until he disappeared completely, leaving only shattered tiles and a puddle of dark blood. And as soon as his screaming stopped, the mirror quietly stitched itself back together, cracks sealing, droplets of red sinking into the glass like it absorbed everything it consumed. At the same time, the school bell rang for lunch, and every student rushed into the cafeteria except one. Zara, Samir's best friend, who stayed behind near the lockers, staring down the hallway where she heard distant footsteps, slow and dragging, like someone pulling heavy limbs across the floor, and then she heard humming, the exact lullaby Samir mentioned before he disappeared, drifting gently from the bathroom, growing louder, faster, manic, and the hallway lights went dark one by one, chasing her as if a predator was approaching. So she ran toward the cafeteria, bursting through the doors pale and shaking, screaming that something was in the school, that Samir was dead, that they needed to leave now. But nobody listened. Everyone just stared at her like she was crazy, and seconds later, every mirror in the cafeteria, on walls, decorations, bathroom doors, even phone screens, flickered to life, showing not their reflections, but a tall, grotesque figure with a stretched face and torn, gaping mouth, crawling toward the crowd, pulling itself forward with bone-like hands stained with Malik's blood. And then all the lights went out across the school at once, followed by the sound of hundreds of students screaming, tables crashing, bodies slamming, and something massive moving through the darkness with inhuman speed, slicing through flesh, dragging students under tables, ripping limbs from torsos, painting the walls with wet, red streaks like twisted murals of murder. And the creature's laughter echoed like broken glass grinding against teeth, overlapping with the distorted, desperate voices of children begging for help. But no one heard them outside because the building locked itself, sealing every exit with the same invisible force that pulled Malik into the mirror, trapping everyone inside with something that didn't just kill, something that devoured, mutilated, wore its victims like disguises. And with every scream, every bone crushed, every drop of blood soaking into the floor, the school felt more alive, pulsing, breathing, feeding, becoming hungrier with every minute of the massacre, because this wasn't just a haunting, this was a ritual, a slaughterhouse, a feeding ground for the man behind the mirror who had finally returned after decades of hunger. The massacre inside the school was discovered the next morning when police arrived to find every door unlocked, lights on, and the entire building silent. But the cafeteria floor was soaked with dried blood, tables overturned, lunches rotting in puddles, and hundreds of students missing with no bodies left behind except for a few scattered limbs and torn clothing, and the survivors, only 7 of them, were found huddled inside the gym storage closet, shaking, covered in blood that wasn't theirs. Some catatonic, some laughing hysterically, one of them, Zara, refusing to speak at all, just staring at a cracked hand mirror she held against her chest, clutching it so tightly her fingers bled, because she swore Samir's face was still trapped inside it, screaming silently, begging her to help him. And when detectives questioned the group, the survivors said the same thing in broken, trembling voices. Something came out of the mirror, something tall, thin, with a mouth too wide and arms too long, and it hunted them, wearing faces of the dead, mimicking voices, calling their names in the dark, dragging children into ceilings, walls, and toilets, vanishing without a trace. And the police dismissed it as shock because they found no footprints, no claw marks, no forced entry, not even a single fingerprint. Just impossible amounts of blood and bizarre symbols carved into tables, floors, and lockers that forensic experts couldn't identify, symbols that looked like spirals combined with teeth or eyes with extended roots, symbols that seemed to pulse under UV light like veins. And when investigators tried to review CCTV footage, they found cameras looping empty hallways even at times when screams echoed through the school, and in some clips, distorted silhouettes appeared, stretched and unnatural, crawling upside down along the ceiling or standing still for hours, staring directly into the camera with a face that looked like nothing human. And every time someone paused the footage, the creature suddenly appeared behind the viewer reflection in the monitor, forcing detectives to unplug the system entirely because officers started having panic attacks, hallucinations, and one cop sliced his own face open with scissors after claiming something was wearing him like a mask. And as news spread, the school became the center of a national scandal, parents demanding answers, politicians promising justice, pastors claiming demons were involved, and media calling it the Mirror Massacre. But no one knew the truth except the survivors, who were taken to a psychiatric facility where they were locked in a secured ward, monitored 24/7, But even their strange things happened at night. Reflective surfaces would fog up with outlines of hands pressed against the other side, prayers written backward in blood-like streaks. Security cameras picking up whispers of children crying or laughing at 3 a.m., and patients developing mirror phobias so intense they ripped every reflective object from walls, windows, even spilled water on the floor so they wouldn't see faces staring back. But the most disturbing phenomenon involved Zara, who refused to speak until one night she started scribbling violently across her walls, writing the same phrase over and over until her fingernails tore off. The school is still hungry. And she wasn't wrong, because the building itself seemed to breathe. Windows fogged from the inside, condensation dripping like sweat, floors warping, pipes groaning, and a smell of death lingering even after industrial cleaning. And when construction crews arrived to tear down the cursed bathroom, they disappeared inside without radio contact, tools dropped outside like they dropped everything mid-step, and the principal, desperate to avoid another scandal, ordered the bathroom bricked over, sealed permanently. But before workers finished, they heard knocking from the other side, slow, rhythmic, like someone trapped was begging to be let out. Followed by a voice, a child's voice, crying for help, saying, "Please don't leave me here." And when one worker almost removed the bricks to help, Zara, sedated and restrained in her room miles away, suddenly woke up screaming, eyes rolled back, shrieking, "Don't open it! It's not a child, it's a face wearing a body." And that same night, 3 more students went missing, abducted by something unseen, dragged through windows that weren't broken, pulled from beds without a scream, leaving only deep, scrape marks on the floorboards as if they were being yanked by something massive and determined. And investigators finally realized the truth. The massacre wasn't a random event, it was a ritual to open a door, and the creature wasn't just haunting the school, it was expanding its territory, feeding, building an army of empty bodies and stolen faces. And the 7 survivors weren't safe. They were targets, witnesses, sacrifices, because the man behind the bathroom mirror wasn't finished. He was just beginning. And somewhere in the psych ward, in the darkest hour of night, the mirror in Zara's room flickered to life, glowing like a doorway, and Samir's bloodied face looked out, whispering, "He's coming for you all." I didn't sleep for days after the massacre, not because of grief or shock, but because every time I closed my eyes I saw the mirror, rippling like skin stretched too thin, and I heard Samir's voice pleading for help, not just begging to be freed but begging me to stop him. As if the creature was using our friend's face like a mask and puppeteering his agony. And when I was finally released from police custody with the remaining survivors, I thought the worst was over, that the horror lived only in that cursed school, sealed behind brick and concrete. But the nightmares followed us home, waking me to the sound of wet footsteps crawling across my ceiling, nails scraping plaster like someone hanging upside down just inches above my head, whispering my name with Samir's voice, whispering, "Open your eyes, I'm here." And when I finally woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, I found my bedroom mirror fogged with a smeared imprint of a face pressed from the other side, mouth open too wide, too hungry. And when I wiped the glass with a trembling hand, I felt warmth on the surface like a living body pressed against it only moments before. And while investigators tried to blame trauma for the hallucinations, I knew something had escaped the school, something that needed us, the survivors, not to witness its horror but to finish its ritual. Because Samir's last words weren't just warning, they were instruction. He's coming for you all, not because he wanted to kill us but because we were unfinished vessels, empty masks waiting to be worn. And that theory shattered into reality when Zara disappeared from the psychiatric facility during a power outage, leaving behind a single message scratched into the floor with her fingernails. "He is wearing me." And that same night every mirror in the building cracked from the inside like something slammed against them in fury, as if it was trying to get out but couldn't, because Zara broke the one rule that kept him contained. Reflective surfaces are gateways, and once you break the mirror, you close the door. But she didn't escape to safety. She escaped to finish the ritual, and the 7 survivors were now 6, then 5, then 4, dropping one by one over the next few nights, disappearing from locked rooms, from guarded hallways, from houses where parents slept only feet away, taken without a scream, without a trace. Until police realized they weren't being abducted, They were stepping through windows they thought were doors, walking toward voices calling their names, voices that sounded like dead friends, like familiar laughter, like love weaponized into a lure, and I realized the creature didn't kill to feed. It killed to multiply, to wear new faces, to move without suspicion. And I saw proof when I looked into my bathroom mirror and saw my reflection smiling even though my face was frozen in terror, smiling with teeth too many, too sharp, as a second face slowly peeled itself out of mine, emerging from my shoulder like a fetus made of shadows, grinning and whispering, "We need more," before vanishing back under my skin, leaving me vomiting blood and bile into the sink, staring at myself in horror as my reflection moved a second slower than me, lagging like a glitching puppet, and I realized the creature wasn't inside the mirror anymore. It was inside me, wearing me from the inside out, waiting for my walls to break, for my mind to collapse, because once I feared it enough, I would become hollow, and once hollow it could walk in, wear my body the way it wore Samir's, and that's when I understood the truth behind the massacre. It was never random violence, never chaos, never revenge. It was a harvest, a preparation, a cleansing of identity, because a human being with a soul fights possession but a traumatized, broken one becomes a house without a front door, and I wasn't the only one falling apart. The other survivors were calling me, sobbing, saying they saw movement in there. Reflections, that they heard footsteps in their walls, that they smelled rot every time they showered. And when I met with the remaining 3 at an abandoned church outside town, we all looked like corpses, sleepless, pale, our eyes bloodshot, as if something was physically eating the life out of us, and we agreed on one plan. Return to the school, find the mirror, destroy the door from the original source. But when we arrived, the school wasn't abandoned. It was open, lights on, doors unlocked, as if classes had just ended, and the hallways smelled clean, fresh, nothing like the slaughterhouse it had been. But I knew immediately something was wrong because when we stepped inside, TVs turned on by themselves, showing live footage of every hallway from the security cameras. But there were no people there, no students, no teachers, only shadows moving in impossible shapes, crawling, bending, dragging themselves across the ceiling, and then the speakers crackled to life with the principal's voice, but stretched, distorted, repeating one phrase, "Welcome back, children," over and over, until the voice dissolved into laughter, the same laughter Samir made the night he died, except layered with a dozen other voices, children, adults, all blended into a chorus of torture. And when we reached the bathroom door, we found it broken open from the inside, bricks pushed outward as if something enormous forced its way through, leaving drag marks on the floor, gouges in the wall, and deep scratches along the metal stalls, spelling messages like, "We are many," and "The face is hungry." But most terrifying of all was a single phrase carved repeatedly in every surface, "We will wear the world," and before we could run, the lights cut out, plunging us into blackness so thick I couldn't tell if my eyes were open. And in the dark we heard footsteps, not walking but slapping wetly against tile. Dozens of them, hundreds, as if a crowd crawled toward us, and voices began whispering from every direction. Voices of our classmates, our teachers, our parents, all saying the same word, "Open," not like a command, but like a prayer, begging us to surrender, to break, to let them in, and I felt my body go numb, my limbs rigid, as if invisible hands held me still, and I saw movement in the darkness, faces forming. Out of nothing, pale, eyeless, grinning, stretching into existence, and behind them, towering over them, was a figure tall enough to scrape the ceiling, limbs dangling like ropes, head tilted unnaturally, and as it stepped forward, tiles cracked under its weight, pipes burst, walls bled thick black liquid, and something inside my skull snapped with an audible crack as I realized the unthinkable. This creature didn't kill humans. It repurposed them, reshaped them, turned them into costumes, and the children weren't dead, they were worn, stitched into something larger, their voices trapped inside, screaming to escape, and the monster reached toward me with hands that split into dozens of fingers, each finger ending in a human mouth, whispering my name in Samir's voice, pleading, "Let me in, I don't want to be alone." And I would have surrendered. God, I would have given up everything to end the terror, if I hadn't heard the voices behind me, the voices of my friends, screaming, not in fear, but in rage, screaming, "Run!" And I did, even as the creature tore into them, even as their screams rose to a pitch so inhuman it shattered lights, even as their blood painted the walls in thick arcs, because I knew if I stayed, I would become one of them. I would live forever behind glass, trapped in a face that wasn't mine. And as I escaped through the doors, sprinting into the night, the school collapsed inward, sinking, folding, devouring itself, as if whatever lived inside no longer needed walls, because it had enough bodies, enough faces, enough voices to walk the world freely. And when I looked into a passing car window, breathless, broken, horrified, I saw my reflection. And it didn't look back, it didn't move, it didn't smile. It just watched me with Samir's eyes, whispering through my lips, "We are already behind you."